Okay, so here we are at episode number 39, the HPA podcast, with myself as always, David Nolan. So before I get into today's episode, just a few things I'd like to talk about. Firstly, whether you're watching this on YouTube or listening on your phone, please make sure you subscribe to either the channel or the podcast, allowing you to automatically get the podcast each and every week without having to go and search for it. And please take 2 or 3 minutes of your day, leave a comment below the video or leave us a review on iTunes. Just helps us understand exactly what you want from the show and allows us to reach a wider audience by getting the content out there to more people. So the first big announcement I have is my good friends over at Sigma Nutrition and Performance have absolutely blown it out of the water with this project I've been working on. Danny Lennon and Gar Ben have arranged the first European Powerlifting Conference to be hosted in Limerick on July 1st and 2nd, 2017. So anyone that's interested in powerlifting or strength training as a whole, please check it out and consider making the trip over here to Ireland and coming to see top class speakers such as Greg Nuckols, Eric Helen, Bryce Lewis and a load of other top quality guests coming over to talk about the practical application of powerlifting and how you can become a better powerlifter. So I'll leave the links to everything they're doing in the description below and in the show notes for you to check out. So the second announcement I want to make is my friend over at Revive Stronger, Steve Hall, is hosting Dr. Mike Israetel for a seminar on the weekend of May 26th. So that's going to be in London and Mike's going to talk about maximising muscle hypertrophy. So he's going into the science of building muscle and educating you what is the best way to maximise the amount of muscle you can build. So anyone interested in muscle hypertrophy, bodybuilding, please go check out Steve's channel. I'll leave the links below to everything you can do about that conference and it's well worth the trip over to meet Dr. Mike Israetel and meet Steve then as well. So on to today's guest. I had the absolute honour of being joined by Menno Henselmans of Bayesian Bodybuilding. So in a past life, Menno was a statistician and business consultant, and then he left it all to follow his passion and start an online fitness business that is Bayesian Bodybuilding. So he's an online coach and content provider that he really embodies what evidence-based practice is. So myself and Menno get into the concept of metabolic damage. So whether chronic dieting can break your metabolism or whether your metabolism can be broken at all, and then the concept of reverse dieting, which is often advocated as a way of combating this broken metabolism. We then chat about the role of genetics and what they have to do in muscle growth, strength increases and your ability to lose fat. And finally we talk about chasing your passion and why chasing your passion is important for both success and happiness in life, but the difference between blindly chasing your passion and doing it in a clever, systematic way. So let's get into it with Menno Henselmans. So it is an absolute honour to be joined today by Menno Henselmans. Thanks so much for coming on and having a chat with me today, Menno.
My pleasure.
Now, I'm sure the majority of my listeners know exactly who you are, but for the very few who don't, if you'd like to give us just a brief summary or synopsis of your background and your current work, please.
Yeah, sure. I'm the creator of Bayesian Bodybuilding, and in that method, I basically apply what I learned during my education as an economist and a statistician and a scientist, and I apply that to bodybuilding. So it's a very much data-driven and, as we're currently, as a popular term is, evidence-based kind of model, a way of thinking about fitness. So very scientific, based heavily on scientific research. And in that, I do coaching, and I have a personal training certification program, and I work with a whole team, actually. It's not just me at Bayesian Bodybuilding, that we promote evidence-based fitness like you do.
That's brilliant. It's a very diverse background and you're kind of the new breed of evidence scientist that's going forward, exercise scientist, that's both within the research and practice. So today the first topic we want to get into is one that there's a lot of misinformation around, and that's the concept of metabolic damage and then also reverse dieting. So within the fitness community, bodybuilding community, we have people that are afraid to go on long-term diets for the fear of their metabolism becoming broken. We also have people saying that they can't lose weight because through yo-yo dieting, through chronic dieting, they've broken their metabolism, and people are trying to market certain strategies to them to rebuild their metabolism. So first of all, if you'd like to just put everyone on an even playing field, Menno, and could you give us just a brief summary of the idea or the thoughts behind metabolic damage?
Right, because our team has conducted a scientific review on metabolic damage, and there are a few different definitions in use, but most of them come down to a definition that we also used is that it's a slowing down of your basal metabolic rate that persists after weight regain. So after a diet, even if you come back to your original body composition or your original fat-free mass and body fat percentage, then the theory is that your metabolism is broken. It's really damaged. It's lower than it was before the prolonged diet.
And from your research and review, what does the current body of evidence say about the concept of metabolic damage?
Right. We found overwhelming support, basically, that there is no such thing as metabolic damage. And we looked at malnourished individuals, women with anorexia nervosa, bodybuilding contest competitors, wrestlers that have to make weight in season for their competitions, and various experiments, including the famous Minnesota starvation experiment, where people were dieted to basically contest shape without the lean body mass that bodybuilders have. It was during World War II when ethics committees were a bit more lax in what we could do in terms of scientific research. So we have great data on that, and all of it basically shows that if you look at how someone's metabolic rate develops and you take into account their body composition, because that's the thing that most studies don't do, then we see that there is no change in what we define as the ratio of predicted to measured basal metabolic rate. Because sure, someone's metabolism will decrease as they diet, but they're losing weight. And often in studies, especially the studies that we have in bodybuilding contest competitors and starving individuals, they're losing lean body mass, very importantly. And that decreases their basal metabolic rate. The less weight you have, especially if it's lean body mass, the lower your metabolic rate. But if you correct for that, then we see that there is no change in basal metabolic rate in relation to fat-free mass.
So, and how strong is the link between body composition and your basic metabolic rate? Is it very strong? Is it all down to essentially the amount of ratio of fat to muscle you have and your total body weight?
Yeah, there's a very strong relation between body composition and basal metabolic rate. And the order of magnitude is very different for different tissues, because fat mass has a basically negligible effect on basal metabolic rate. So if you gain some fat mass, then this has very little effect on your basal metabolic rate, at least directly, because it can't affect adaptive thermogenesis, which means that you can think of that as a blueprint, basically, that your body has. And at each body fat percentage, it multiplies your metabolism by a different figure. It's basically a method that while you lean out, your body becomes more conservative with energy. It has very little to do with your thyroid or any kind of more fundamental metabolic process. It has to do mainly with your central nervous system's efficiency of movement. So it reduces what's called SPA, or need in research, spontaneous physical activity, or non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Basically, energy you expend as you perform involuntary movement, nodding your head, like I'm moving my arms now when I'm talking, these kind of things. And also just efficiency of movement during exercising intentional movements. So that can have a little effect, but overall fat mass has very little direct effect on your metabolic rate. It's not very metabolically active adipose tissue, your fat mass. So there's a much bigger influence of muscle tissue. It's not as big as, some bodybuilders claim that, you gain muscle and that muscle is just burning energy, burning fat all day long and you're getting ripped because you're a lot bigger. But it is a significant effect, and we have various studies showing increases of 5 to 10% even after just a few months of strength training in basal metabolic rate. So that's quite significant, and especially if you look at research comparing bodybuilders and sedentary individuals, then you're looking at differences in daily energy intake that are comparable to performing a completely extra exercise session. So then it adds up. But most of all, body composition is most strongly related to your metabolic rate because of organ mass. And that's also something we did in our methodology. We used formulas that were specific at each level of body fat percentage, and those were fine-tuned in previous research to account for differences in organ mass. Because, muscles are metabolically active compared to fat tissue, but it's nothing like your liver or your heart. which has to be active all day long and keep your body healthy and going. So organ mass is by far the most metabolically active tissue. And that's also probably why when you're going to really deep level contest prep, that we see decreases in metabolic rate that are a lot more pronounced than at more healthier ranges, because you're probably actually losing some organ mass at that level of leanness.
Yeah, and then with all this body of evidence, Menno, the concept of reverse dieting is thrown out there, and it's kind of to fix your metabolism, or people have this holy grail that you can eat more and raise your metabolism through this reverse dieting method. Is there any merit to the reverse diet methodology at all?
Yeah, I'd say there's merit to it. It's just taken to a bit too extremes, like the literal concept of reverse dieting, literally reversing your diet. So if you spend 6 months cutting, then you would spend 6 months working back up to your previous maintenance energy intake. That's a bit excessive because, in the extreme scenario, you often see that people are actually still in energy deficit after their contest. So if you were in, say, 10% energy deficit at the end of your contest prep, and then you would increase energy intake by 5%, you're still in energy deficit, which doesn't make a lot of sense, right? You're not trying to lose any more fat. So why stay in energy deficit? So based on that, you can be a lot more aggressive. What we found in our research is that energy intake and body composition are the two main components that affect your metabolic rate. But it doesn't really matter how fast they adjust. Like, your body doesn't have a memory. It just reacts to these two inputs primarily. And it doesn't matter if you gradually increase energy intake or you jump back up to a high level immediately. There's very little delay. So you can basically go right back into your bulking caloric surplus. Ideally not dreamer bulk, but just an optimized sweet spot of energy intake. Usually around 5% for the average contest competitor, something like that it would be. So if you're on 5% deficit, going to 5% surplus, you can increase energy intake by at least 10%. And I say at least because your metabolism will increase a bit, which means that probably next week you can increase it by 10% again, what I often see in my clients at least. So that is how you should do it, and why reverse dieting can be actually harmful. But, it's a lot better than the reaction that reverse dieting is, because reverse dieting is basically a reaction to the post-contest binge, where a lot of contest competitors, like, they don't have a plan. They think, like, after their contest, that's what they planned for, and afterwards there's no more idea of what to do. So they're really hungry, they're food deprived, they've got a whole list of things that they want to eat, and that list is basically the plan. That's all the plan there is for their diet. So then you see some individuals that just absolutely destroy their cutting progress and the fat loss they made in a matter of weeks or even days. Like, there was one guy I've seen that probably topped the chart. He gained, I think it was 11 kilos in 3 days. And it was a normal-sized guy. So not a heavyweight 100 kilo bodybuilder, just like 8 kilos going up to 91 in 3 days. That's like hard. I didn't even know how he did it. So
crazy.
Yeah, so reverse dieting is a reaction to that, but there's a road in the middle that's a bit more fine-tuned and optimized.
And how much would you say should someone aim for? If someone has been in a stage of chronic dieting or even contest prep, what kind of, I know you said you can raise 5 or 10%, would there be any guidelines for how much or how quickly they should raise their caloric intake after this either contest or long chronic dieting phase?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can bump it up to that level immediately. I like to be a bit conservative because you could basically account for metabolic adaptation and immediately increase energy intake by, say, 20%. And often if someone has a pretty adaptive metabolism, that still works out. But, it's better to be a bit on the conservative side and not risk a lot of fat gain than to be overly aggressive. But like I said, you can jump right back up to your ideal surplus. So the ideal surplus depends on how advanced you are. If you're competing and you should be on that stage, you should be an advanced trainee, and that means that your ideal energy surplus probably needn't be over 5%. Anything over that often just results in dreamer bulking, as it's called. And that's what you definitely want to avoid. So if you're, like I said in the example, 5% deficit, going to 5% surplus means you can increase energy intake by at least 10%, like from one day to the next, from show day to the next day.
Perfect. And one thing we often hear with the concept of reverse diet metabolic damage, people say about set point theory, or this, that your body has a fat cell memory, that you kind of, if you lose body fat or if you try to get to a certain way, that your body tries to drag you back essentially. What do you think, or what is your take on this whole concept that we hear advocated by some?
Yeah, that's actually a sort of variant of metabolic damage. The Liu et al., that we also critiqued in our review paper, they posit something like fat stores memory, and they say that your body suppresses your metabolic rate until you have regained your fat mass. But we show that that is based on using the wrong statistics in their analysis, not accounting for the full recovery period of the Minnesota starvation experiment, and some more technical details that people can find in the paper if they're interested. But the general point is that all of this research that finds something like a set point, they just show that people, it's just basically a description of the data. It's not a mechanism. They don't actually show that there is something in the body that has, some, like a set point or like a meter in your body that says, okay, I want to be, at this amount of grams of fat or this percentage of body fat. Your body doesn't have anything like that. So what a set point is, and some people say we should use the term settling point. I think Eric Helms also uses that term, but I'm more in favor of completely getting rid of the whole concept, because there is no such thing. What happens is, a term I like to use because of my background in economics, is equilibrium. So there are various factors in someone's lifestyle, their food choices, how often they go to the gym, their activity level. They determine what kind of energy balance someone ends up in, especially if they're not tracking their macros, because most people aren't in the research that we look at here. The people that yo-yo diet. So these factors over time, they tend to drive someone towards a certain equilibrium level. If you do not make lasting changes in those factors, you don't make sustainable lifestyle changes, you just go on a diet and then you go off the diet, then the same factors that got you fat in the first place will mercilessly get you fat again, because nature doesn't care. It just sees these parameters and these result in this other parameter, basically. So there is nothing magical going on here, basically. It's just the effect that certain things will get you fat, and if you do them again, they will make you fat again. So you have to make sustainable changes in your food choices, increase lean body mass to increase energy expenditure, those kind of things. That's also what we see. People that do strength training are a lot more successful at avoiding yo-yo dieting, because people that don't, they lose lean body mass during the dieting, end up with a lower metabolic rate, and then sometimes you even see that they overshoot, as the researchers call it, because now they go back to their old lifestyle, they go off the diet, and now they have a lower metabolic rate because they lost muscle mass and maybe even organ mass during the dieting. So when they revert back to their crappy old lifestyle, then they get even fatter than they did before. And the key to that is just making sustainable lifestyle choices and performing strength training.
Yeah, and again, as you said, these yo-yo dieting that lead to people, they do end up with decreased metabolism from it, but it's not through a broken metabolism, but rather through a decrease in their lean body mass, and that in turn reduces their resting metabolic rate. And I think that's a very important fact that people need to understand, that the whole concept of metabolic damage and reverse dieting is hugely misunderstood. And thanks so much for kind of clearing that up and giving what the evidence says there, Menno. So
yeah, that's exactly right.
The next thing that we want to talk about, and a lot of people we see, and especially beginner to even intermediate lifters and competitors in both bodybuilding and powerlifting, a lot of them kind of get obsessed with how quickly they can get the results. They want everything now, and they forget that it's a long-term process, that it takes you have to be very process orientated. One of the reasons is because they see people have very different accelerations along their journey in terms of their strength gains, in terms of their muscle mass gains. And one impact of that, obviously there's pharmacological reasons with some people, but what impact does genetics play in the rate of progression in our ability to gain muscle mass and to gain muscle strength?
Right. And the impact of genetics on how much muscle mass you can gain is huge. There's really no other way around it. We have, the genetic freaks that we all know, like Ronnie Coleman. Like many people have it on good account that he was still natural when he got his pro card, which is just insane. You can see Arnold Schwarzenegger already had hugely developed pecs and biceps well before, in his teens even already. You can see that the structure is there for his physique. Other great examples of powerlifters. In my PT course, I often refer to Andy Bolton because he's a great example of just an absolute freak when it comes to strength. I think the first time he squatted was he could do 400 pounds. Like someone just taught him how to do it, and then the first go in the gym ended up as a 400-pound squat, which for many people is a good, realistic lifetime goal. So it's just obscene that someone can do that first time in the gym. But those are, the freaks of the freaks, the outer percentiles of the normal distribution, as a statistician would say it. Yeah. For most people are just normal. They're average. Even though your mama told you were special, most of us really, in most regards, were average. And even if you're special in certain regards or above average, below average, then often in other regards you have an advantage or disadvantage, which means that most people genetically can get quite similar results. And you don't, if you were one of those freaks, then you would probably know. And what I also find is that the people that have the best genetics don't have the motivation because it's so easy for them that they don't appreciate it like we do. So, like probably most listeners, you're probably not even listening to this podcast if you have top tier genetics, because you'd be just touching a weight and avoiding squats because your thighs get too big, that kind of thing. So research finds that some people even don't respond at all to strength training. They're called non-responders. But although that phenomenon is quite well established, what research doesn't show is that they don't react to all kinds of strength training. It just showed that particular cookie cutter program they used in that study did not result in muscle growth during that period. So from what I've seen in my clientele, I've had one person who I legitimately believed did not gain any muscle mass, and just seemed no matter what we did, just couldn't gain any muscle mass. And I refunded him all his money. So that's the promise I make. But that's one out of the hundreds of people I've coached. So I think, and it's the same for many of my colleagues. So this phenomenon seems to be in practice a lot less common than we see in the literature. And I'm not even fully convinced that it's a significant part of the population that cannot grow any muscle. Almost everyone, even if it's a slower rate than the genetic freaks, they can gain an appreciable amount of muscle mass and radically transform their physique over years.
Yeah, I very much agree that most people that would be classed as non-responders both in literature and practice, really, I call them low sensitive more than anything else, that they're just, once we get in, dial in nutrition first and foremost to see that they're doing everything there. A lot of time it can be just cured by volume, looking at the volume and the type of exercise they're using. As you said, they're not responsive to one particular avenue. And one thing I want to talk about is the rate of progression and what people should expect, because I'm seeing a trend in the last couple of years of young men especially and young women jumping into competition very quickly. So only training for a year and a half, and then spending 6 months dieting right down to get stage prep. And personally, I believe a lot of people are jumping in too quickly into stage prep. So in terms of rate of progression, how long or what gains would you expect, would you say someone can expect in the first, say, year to 5 years of training? And also, as a kind of caveat to that, how long should you be training before you consider about stepping on stage for the general population?
Right. I think it's true that I also observed that people are a lot more readily enter into contest prep, and I think that's due to the new divisions that we have, especially for women. The bikini division, with some federations, does not require very large amounts of muscle mass, which means, and also not being that lean, which means that a lot of women that just look fit in terms of bodybuilding purposes, you wouldn't, they'd still fall into, doesn't look like they lift compared to rough bodybuilding standards, and then they can compete. And that's great because it motivates a lot more people to join the sport and compete in physique sports. But it also means that, like you say, it can water down the competitive element. And it means that some people are very, see competing more as more important to the journey than I at least think it should be. Should be more of a side effect for it. And if, competing is not what you do it for, it's the feeling better, working towards achieving goals, developing your personality, an overall lifestyle of self-improvement is what bodybuilding is to me. So in that regard, it can be harmful. But, if they enjoy it, then I'd say it's perfectly fine. In terms of concrete figures, by the way, in reference to the last part, how much should genetics matter? We can actually express this statistically in what researchers call our heritability factor. And it's about 50%, it seems, on average. Maybe a bit more in some research. But 50% is close to many things in life. Seems almost too coincidental, right? 50-50 nature is 50, nurture is other 50%. But it does seem to cluster around that level. So in that regard, you could say that your capacity to build muscle is about as influenced by your genetics as your personality and almost everything else in your life. So it's not like you're particularly screwed compared to, just anything else in life. Some people are taller, some people are smarter. It's just people vary. But muscle growth isn't any different in that regard. But what I was saying about concrete figures, I'm actually may have a bit of a controversial view in terms of how fast people can progress. I think that from rank untrained individual, but not obese, just at a body fat percentage where they don't have a healthy body fat percentage range, then it should only take about 3 years for them to get to the advanced level. But that is 3 years of continuous training, continuous progress on an optimized program, which in reality almost never occurs. So if I look at myself, for example, which is a pretty decent example, I think, for many people, I'm still making at least some gains, setting some strength PRs occasionally. I've been training for 14 years about. And of that, it would probably be fair to say that before I reached, say, 95% of my potential, 90% maybe, it was only 3 years of actual progress. Like there were a couple of years in there where, like some mistakes I made, for example, were dreamer bulking and then crash dieting, ending up with no net muscle gain over many months. Some periods I just started the low volume kind of training, and I did the functional training thing, tried a lot of different programs. A lot of years even, like if you compared photos across the year at the similar body fat percentages, you can basically say that many of those years, of those 14 years, just didn't result in any progress. It just wasn't hitting the right buttons anymore to make further gains, which means that you could basically take out all those years, and in the theoretical scenario, if I had not done them, it wouldn't have impacted my progress at all. If I just have performed, the programs that actually resulted in appreciable progress, I might have been here in, 4 years, 5 years. So you can progress very, very fast, especially as a beginner. In that first year, if you get an untrained individual with a highly unlikely combination of perfect dedication and an optimized program, which means they're probably being coached because there's no way they find that out that quickly themselves, then you can make very, very significant progress in just 1 year. So in that regard, you can be, stage ready in terms of maybe bikini. A woman could be bikini ready in 1 year. They have okay genetics, depending on the federation, because that varies hugely. Sometimes bikini is almost as strict as body fitness or even figure. But yeah, most people, they're not going to be competitive in 1 year, not at the pro level of the sport at least.
And in terms of genetics, one of the things we often hear kind of bandied around about genetics is people say, oh, I'm genetically predisposed to holding body fat, or my genetics don't allow me to get rid of body fat. What role do genetics play in our ability to lose fat or our fat distribution?
Right. Those are very different factors. Like genetics play a huge role in your body fat distribution. That almost seems to be an entirely genetic blueprint, in fact, with a very large gender difference, with classically women holding most of the fat in their thighs, also triceps area a bit more than men, upper back, relatively lean midsection, whereas men tend to have a lot more centralized fat distribution, also because they have poorer metabolic health in general than women, in part due to having less estrogen. And this means that men have stubborn fat mostly on their abs, and traditionally or generally on average, and women store most of their stubborn fat around their hips. And those are the classic areas that people say, okay, I cannot lose the fat there. But it means that you lose the fat there last, and you cannot do much about it. You can be, the only way to really appreciably change your body fat distribution is to become healthier. But for women, that actually makes the stubborn fat worse, because it's very healthy to have a feminine body fat distribution, which means that most of your fat goes to your thighs, and you have very little fat on your abs, very little visceral fat in between your organs, because that's unhealthier, at least in excess, than subcutaneous fat, which is like the fat on the rest of your body, just below the skin. And what was I saying?
In terms of the role of genetics,
you can change the body fat distribution, but you can't lose more fat. And that is just the entire problem, basically, for most people. So even though it's the stubborn fat that goes there, even if you could change it, the stubborn fat will go elsewhere, and you'd still want to get it off. So you'd still have to lose it. There's no way you can, magically make it go away without burning the fat. So you just have to get leaner. And for most people, that really is the end of the story. Like, the genetic differences in fat loss are not nearly as large as for muscle growth. Basically, you have two factors here, and that's the reason there is very little difference in how easy it is for people to lose fat. You have your metabolic rate and your appetite. If people have because people say, okay, that person has a high metabolic rate. For one, actually, the variation, the heritability factor, and the coefficient of variation, which is a measure that statisticians use to express how much something varies in relation to something else. So you can objectively compare, say, metabolic rate to height. Then we see that metabolic rate is actually not very variable. Most of the differences in energy expenditure between individuals are the result of their body composition or their activity level. So it's not that one person has, they exist, but it's not the case that there are a lot of individuals with a super high metabolism. Often they either have more muscle mass or they're just more active than other people. And the more crucial thing is, even if they do have an actually higher metabolic rate, that is often accompanied by changes in the thyroid hormone system, which also regulates appetite. And for lean body mass, it's the same. Lean body mass also feeds into your appetite, which means that individuals, there's a strong correlation in individuals between appetite and metabolic rate. So even if someone does have a high metabolic rate, often it means they also have a large appetite. Yeah. So relatively speaking, for them, dieting on 3,000 calories, which to someone else might seem like, a dream, is similarly hard because they just have more hunger, more of a problem with limiting themselves to that energy intake. So for fat loss, I'd actually say that research is quite convincing that everyone basically can get a six-pack. There is nothing that limits how lean you can get. And there is also not that much difference between people in how easy it is. You just need to do it right. And here, knowledge and a good program are really the keys, like much more so even than for muscle growth. where there is a stronger genetic component.
Yeah, and I think there really, you talked about two key points that people need to take away there, Menno, and kind of myth busting in some way. The first of all being that body fat, we don't really, there's no one that's genetically predisposed to not being able to lose that body fat in those stubborn areas. It's just to lose it last, that it'd be difficult because they have to just reduce overall body fat, and eventually it will go from those stubborn or undesirable areas. That there's no kind of special exercise, special supplement or any method that can just spot reduce. So that's one thing people need to be very clear on. They need to just reduce overall body fat and it'll come down. And then the second is that the variance in metabolism between people, although it does exist, there is a variance, it is very minimal and insignificant really for the majority of people. That it is not people have either a fast or slow metabolism, but it's just rather the amount of food intake and also their activity levels. So when you normalize for that, everyone's metabolism is pretty much the same in terms of its rate. So there are two kind of factors that people really need to take away and kind of nail down in their own mindset. So the final thing I want to talk to you, Menno, is about business development, because obviously in terms of the direction your life was going at one stage to where it is now is completely a 180 U-turn, you could say. And one big thing for you was following your passion. And obviously it's always good to encourage people to follow your passion. So the first thing I'm going to ask you is, how important was following your passion in terms of your success in your business? But then also, you came from a very obviously critical mind as an economist statistician. Is there a difference between following your passion blindly and kind of spinning your wheels? So how do you know when you need to reassess that maybe diving 100% in is not the best way for success?
Right, it's actually funny because I saw a post of Brad Schoenfeld on passion stating that passion is the driving force behind everything. And I fully agree with that. For me, it was also following my passion that led me to my career change. I started off in a more conventional in the corporate sector, working as a business consultant specialized in advanced statistical data analysis. And that was basically the career path that was expected of me, the more prestigious thing to do. And I thought, I should do more than fitness somehow, or, it wasn't what was expected of me by my environment, my parents. And I just realized more and more that I would deeply regret living that lifestyle in the corporate sector, having an office job, those kind of things, if I were to do that until I retired. And that lifestyle just would not result in the most life satisfaction for me at all. But it wasn't like one day I just decided, okay, screw this, I'm going to follow my heart now instead of my brain. It was actually a very gradual transition. I started making plans for traveling, also where we wanted to live, because now I travel all over the world because I work online and I have seminars all over the globe, so I fit that into my travel plans. And I'm in a different country basically every month. So that is, for me, something that I really enjoy, traveling, and I can combine with my work now. I researched this, originally went to Belize because they spoke English there. There was tax benefits, so I could go there and have a low cost of living, not pay a lot of taxes, and it would be beneficial even if it didn't really work out in terms of personal training and my own business. We could still, get by. And we also had a backup plan. Like I maintained good relations with my employer. So I said, I'm going to do this. This is something I really want to do in my life. If it doesn't work out, would I still be welcome here? And they said, yeah, sure. We'd be happy to have you back. I understand what you're doing. So it was great. I worked up to it for basically a year, where other people are having their lunch break. I was emailing clients to the point that I basically had 2 full-time jobs at some point. And when I actually stopped working, which was a gradual process, I kept working for some clients, but not other clients as a consultant, for example. Started working a bit more from home, discussed it all with my employer. And I set up my own business already and already had the T Nation article there, which drove a huge amount of traffic to the website that I also put up then. And it was a very meticulous process, very planned. Not, it's not that, like I say, you following your passion is mutually exclusive with having a rational career trajectory in mind. You should plan for it all and, be realistic. You want to do what you like, but there are real life limitations that you face, and you have to work around those.
Yeah, I think that's a very good thing for people to take away, because although you should follow your passion, for everyone in life, they should do something that gives them as much satisfaction. You have to be a realist at the same time and put a plan in place that maybe, as you said, over the year, that while you're financially stable from a certain career, you can on the side be slowly building up and then transition gradually into your passion, but while being financially stable then. So, Menno, one thing we see is a big increase in people trying to follow their passion and becoming online fitness businesses, an online fitness coach. So, but the thing is, it is very much on the rise and still on the rise, the amount of people getting into online coaching. But the problem is the level of competence and knowledge people should have before they get into it. Because a lot of people get themselves into good physical shape and then start thinking that justifies their ability to get other people into good shape and to be kind of responsible for their training and nutrition. So what advice would you give to someone that's maybe considering progressing into online coaching? What level of knowledge and competence should they be at before they even consider this avenue?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's part of the reason why I designed the Bayesian PT course. I educate basically this next generation of online coaches, but it's very much a personal decision for people to make how educated they want to be. Like, I think it is very important not to just have the scientific knowledge, or at least the practical implementation thereof, because you don't have to be a researcher to be a good coach. And also have the real-world experience. Like I say, in many of the things in my PT course, I instruct people that, for example, ad libitum dieting, transitioning to not counting your macros anymore, it is something you want personal experience with before you subject clients to it. The peak week is also something that is very much influenced by personal experience. Weight training in general as well. It is something that you want to have good experience and you want the knowledge. So you cannot just have either a good physique or be the best nerd in the research lab. You have to have, the practice and the knowledge, the practical experience and the knowledge. But there are no hard criteria, which I think is largely a good thing in terms of government regulation, in terms of who can call themselves an online coach. Anyone can really set up a website and start online coaching. And they have that right, and maybe they shouldn't. But I think it's largely self-correcting because, color me an idealist in this regard, but if I look at people that are very successful in the fitness industry, they are all passionate, hardworking, legit, honest, reputable, at least in the evidence-based sphere. So if you look at Brad Schoenfeld, Alan Aragon, Brad Contreras, Birgit Fagerli, Eric Helms, those kind of guys, all really good guys, they all have integrity, they all put the work in, they're all passionate about what they do. None of them are slackers by any means. So, and people see this. There's this idea that some people are, they have integrity, and other people they have marketing. Yeah. But really, I don't see people being able to do that. It's not like people say. It's just like buying a gun. People say that, you can buy a gun, it's easy. But really, who do you know that has a gun illegally owned? In the States it's different probably, but in Europe, I wouldn't have the faintest idea where to get a gun, right? It's something that's easy to say. Just like, if I did marketing, I could be super popular and I just appeal to the mainstream, but not, the science-loving niche. But really, that is actually very hard, and you see that people that don't stay true to their passion and what fits with their own personality, they don't become the most popular individuals. You cannot fake it. People see it, and that is the reason why having a reputation is so important, and it's a process that actually works. And unfortunately, it means that some people that put out really good content sometimes just don't get more popular because they don't stick with it. Yeah. But if you put in the work, you have good quality, and people will see this. If you get results in your clients, people will see it. Like, I don't advertise my coaching, or I've never really run ads or anything for my coaching. I don't do before-after kind of stuff on my website, any of that. Most of my clients are word of mouth. Other clients that tell them, hey, I got good results from this guy and, check it out. And I've seen that, like Børge Fagerli is a great example, like a colleague and friend of mine in Norway. And I think many times his website didn't even work. And he did online coaching, right? So it was just word of mouth. People, I also see this like how people get my email address. It's like often they email me at an email that I no longer have on my website because so many people, they don't get it from my website. They just get it from someone else. So I'm very much an idealist in this regard, that I think if you have good quality content, you know what you do, you get results in people, then people will notice. And success will come if you keep putting in the work and trying to gimmick this, trying to be someone that just doesn't fit with your personality. As cliche as it all sounded, it's all true. And success in fitness, in evidence-based fitness, I think people are pretty good at spotting who's legit, and that's a great thing in the industry.
Yeah, very much so. And I think, as you said, both within business and within training, it's kind of the same principles of just patience and persistence, and just sticking with it over time and trusting the process and becoming very process orientated is kind of the key to long-term success within the industry.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, if you look at the amount of visitors or any kind of metric, which I generally don't concern myself with, but once a year or something, I check up on website visitors and Facebook likes and that kind of stuff. You see that it starts off at nearly nothing and then just gradually creeps up and kept creeping up and creeping up and creeping up, and it's still going up. People think that, there's this one article that makes you famous, or you produced Gangnam Style and you made it, and then boom, you have 1 million visitors to your website and there's your audience right there. But even if that happens, something goes viral that you produce, like Gangnam Style, people forget you're a one-day fly, and it doesn't result in a career, or even in the absolute best case scenario it might. But for most people, if something goes viral in fitness, it's still not. You're not Gangnam Style. So people in China won't know who you are. So it's a minor thing, and it takes a large amount of time to build up a good reputation.
Exactly. I hope that's something that listeners really take away. So before I ask you the final question, Menno, if people are looking to get in contact with you or to follow your content, where are the best places to find you?
You can find everything basically on BayesianBodybuilding.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and a bunch of other stuff that we're seeing if people are interested in. But those are the 3 main channels we use. I have a newsletter. You can find it all on my website, BayesianBodybuilding.com. That's
perfect. And we'll put that in the show notes so people will find that very easy. So that brings us to the final question. And this, again, is one that the guests don't get warning about. It's more of a mindset question. And that is, what would you say is the biggest mistake or learning experience that you have had that has changed the way you approach either your career or your mindset as a whole?
Biggest mistake, like in terms of mindset and everything, or specifically nutrition, exercise?
No, in terms of lifestyle, anything you want, any take on that question?
Well, something I've experienced a bit, for me, actually probably the most radical mind shift change I've experienced was during college when I learned behavioral economics. And specifically the moment was that I fully realized that basically economics is a discipline of a lot of very, very smart people who perform mathematical things that I can't do to some extent, and some of the brightest people in the world are economists. But the whole central doctrine of classical economics is based on the idea that people are fundamentally rational creatures. And it is so blatantly obvious that humans are not rational, from everyday experience to an overwhelming amount of psychological research showing that people are not always fully mathematically optimal in their decision making, that even such a community of people that are so smart can not see this because it is simply tradition that they have this other framework this other perspective on life, on people, that they continue working in this framework of people being rational, creating all these mathematical models, and basing their whole discipline on that fundamentally flawed knowledge. That really put into perspective for me what the powers of social pressure, tradition, what you were taught, those things, what they are compared to the evidence. And if you then think, but Ronnie Coleman says, I love Ronnie Coleman and Kai Green, but I don't consider them the first and foremost world's experts on exercise science or physiology, something like that. And if you then think about, but all the bros say this, how can it be another way? Then that really put things into perspective for me, that something that was well established and then got a reputation for being true in the industry and or in the community, and then people believed it because there was so much evidence for it. It's like in the scientific community, ideas emerge. It is something that is very much inspired by tradition and social pressure and nothing more than that. So that inspired me to write the articles I do. And some people critique me for that, like, you always post controversial stuff. How can it be that everything you post it's always like you're trying to be different. But the reason I do that is because I only write about interesting stuff and things that I think about will move the industry forward, and areas that aren't given as much attention to as they should. Because these kind of things, for me, they make all the difference. Like, a lot of other people also, they can write good articles about how to squat and that kind of stuff. But I think I can make the most difference by looking at these cases where, like what I experienced, you can really create a paradigm shift in how people think. Yeah. So I think that for me was a really big lifestyle lesson.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and the whole concept of the way people are influenced and their behaviours are very interesting, and you could have a whole podcast just going into nitty-gritty of that. So it's been an absolute pleasure and an honour having you on this evening, Menno. Thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule to talk to me today.
My pleasure.
So that was Menno Henselmans of Bayesian Bodybuilding. So I think there's a lot of really good content that you can take away from this week's episode. Menno is really the embodiment of evidence-based practice and applied practitioner. He's not just doing the research, but he's also in the field applying what he knows from the research. So please make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel or have the subscription tab hit on that podcast. Make sure to leave us a comment, send me an email, or leave us a review. Let me know what you think of the podcast and how you think we can improve it. Or feel free to suggest any guests you'd like to see on the podcast. So on to next week, guys. Have a great one.